That was Dupre, Live Your Life Out Loud. You're on 94.9. It is 28 minutes past 4. And it is a Creation Ministries International Day. We had a few minor technical issues getting on to, Dr. Don this afternoon. And fortunately, we've got you on the line, Dr. Don Batten, who I'm assuming whereabouts are you at the moment, Dr. Don?
I'm in Brisbane.
Well, welcome this afternoon to the Creation Ministries segment. Dr. Don, of course, has a PhD in plant science, creationist, agricultural scientist, senior scientist, CMI Australia, and we've all heard Dr. Don Batten on this channel before, and he's absolutely awesome, and we're privileged to have you today, Dr. Don.
Well, thanks, Mick. It's a privilege to be with you.
Now, of course, we often talk about all sorts of interesting things. I've got to say, though, I was really intrigued by the stuff you did at university, and was it mung beans?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we looked at used mung beans as a model system, looking at root formation and cuttings.
Wow!
Looking at how the hormones interact and so on that determine whether roots form. You might have a mint plant you got from the supermarket, and you put it in some water, and the roots form on the stalks.
Yep.
In the water. That's what we're looking at.
Wow. Well, looks very, very interesting. And, of course, we love having you guys on Creation Ministries because we love hearing from scientists to hear your point of view when it comes to the whole creation and evolution argument. And in many cases, it ends up being a bit of an argument or a debate with people. Quite often it's just, we go out to dinner and someone starts asking those tricky questions, and that's why we love having people like yourself. So in just a few minutes, we will be spending some time with Dr. Don. If you have any questions, please send them through to our text line, 0401 949 949. Now we're just going to jump into a little break. That was Seventh Time Down with the 99. You're on 94.9. It's 24 minutes to 5, and we have Dr. Don Batten on the line from Creation Ministries International. Of course, he's has a PhD in plant science, and we did just get a question come through. Interesting one. Why is the ocean salted? I can almost add to that. Why is the ocean salted and a lot of the lakes not salted?
Well, first of all, if God created saltwater fish, you'd expect He would have created salt water for them to live in. So that makes sense. Mm-hmm. But if we had no salt in the ocean to start with, the question would be how long would it take to get it all there? Because when it rains on the land, the water from the rain dissolves salts on the land, and then that washes into the sea, and then when the water evaporates to come back onto the land as more rain, it leaves the salt behind. So you can see that salt's accumulating in the ocean. And you can measure how much salt's being added to the ocean. Look at all the rivers around the world and how much flow they have into the ocean and how much salt's in those rivers. And you can work out how much salt's being added to the oceans every year and how long would it take to get all the salt in the ocean. Well, making assumptions that make it as long as possible, in other words, as old as possible, it would take a maximum of 62 million years to get all the salt in the ocean if there's none to start with. And That's a problem for the idea that the oceans are billions of years old, because if they were, well, why aren't they a lot saltier? Well, in fact, why aren't they like the Dead Sea?
You're right.
So it's actually strong evidence against the deep time, millions and billions of years idea, the fact that the ocean isn't saltier than it is. But as I said, if God created the saltwater fish to live in salt water, there would have been salt in the ocean to start with, and you don't need even 62 million years. You're talking about a biblical time frame. It's quite workable.
Okay, so I guess that's why we have freshwater lakes, because they've had the salt literally washed out of them over time. Is that correct?
Yeah, basically your freshwater lakes have an outlet, so that's running down into a river and then into the ocean, and then of course the rain comes back without the salt and replenishes the lake.
Yeah, wow.
But of course it's being added to the oceans all the time, but the salt's not being added to the lakes all the time because you've got fresh water being deposited in the rain.
Yeah, from the rain. Wow, that makes sense. So, yeah, these long time periods become harder and harder to believe. Every time you hear something like that, I mean, I'd never considered that. But, of course, all those salts washing into the ocean, why isn't there more salt there? Because, of course, yeah, it washes in as a fairly constant rate. Well, you can only imagine initially, like if there was never salt in the water, it would have washed in a lot, a billion years ago, it would have washed in a lot more salts to start with. So it should be sort of wearing down. So it doesn't make sense at all. That even blows the times out more if that was the case. Wow.
Yeah, well, that's the maximum time, 62 million years. I mean, if you do more reasonable estimates, it comes down much less than that. And this assumes there's none to start with, whereas there would have been because you've got saltwater fish to live in it.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But there's a lot of other indications that the deep time, millions of years, doesn't make any sense. I mean, the vertical erosion of continents, for example, again, the rain landing on the continents erodes the land, so you end up with some silt, sand, and so on being washed down in the rivers and being deposited off the coast. And so you can measure the amount of sediment in those rivers, again, similar to calculation, and work out how much is being taken off the continents, like North America or Australia or Africa and so on.
Yep.
And but then you get figures of around 20 million years to take the continents down to sea level from what they are now. Of course, they're supposed to be hundreds of millions of years, even billions of years old. So why are they still there? And they say, well, it's because they come up from underneath, and as you erode stuff off the top, that sort of pops up from below to replace it. Mm-hmm. But there's a big problem with that because sitting on the continents are layers of rock with fossils in them, which they've dated as being all these different millions of years, and there's no evidence of any cycle of uplift and erosion, not even one. So that story doesn't work. And then if you look at the amount of sediment being trapped in dams around the world, so, like Warragamba Dam and all these different dams are trapping silt, because silt doesn't end up going over the spillway or downstream, it's trapped in the dam. And there are a survey of 47,000 large dams around the world show that they are trapping 22 cubic kilometres of sediment every year. Now, you start multiplying these things by millions of years, and you've got a serious problem in terms of the amount of material being eroded off the land. And it works out just the stuff being trapped in the dams. And by the way, if you take the dams away, that means that stuff was flowing out to sea in the rivers. So it's not changing the amount of material. In fact, it might even reduce the amount of material being eroded. But it would take 5.6 million years to erode the land down to sea level, and yet the land is supposed to be hundreds or even billions of years old. If you take into account all the small dams and the river sediments as well, I mean, it's even less. So when you start talking about millions of years, you've got a big problem when you start looking at these actual physical things like the amount of sediment being eroded and the measurements we can actually do in today's world don't stack up for the millions and billions of years idea.
Yeah. I've been to countries around the world where they've got they're not man-made dams, they're just lakes. And you could only imagine that they're also building up silt.
Correct, they are.
And again, you scratch your head, I guess, sort of saying, okay, well, why aren't they all full?
Why aren't they full of sediment? Yeah.
Yeah.
Good observation.
I've never noticed, though. Until you actually said that, I'd never even considered that. But it certainly makes a lot of sense. How can we have this billions-of-year-old planet with all of those natural lakes around the planet?
Well, there's another thing, too, that you look at the layers that contain fossils, and they call it the Phanerozoic, and that's, you've heard of Cretaceous and Jurassic, Jurassic World and all this sort of stuff.
Yep.
These are the layers with fossils in them. and it's called the Phanerozoic, and it averages about 2 kilometres thick around the world. I mean, some places much thinner and other places much thicker, but it averages about 2 kilometres.
Yep.
And it's supposed to represent 541 million years of time. So in other words, it took 541 million years to lay down this 2 kilometres of material. Again, if you start dividing anything by millions, you get tiny figures. Like 2 kilometres divided by 541 million years works out at 0.004 millimetres per year of material. 0.004. That's like, I think it's about a 40th thickness of a sheet of paper
Yes.
per year. And yet, this material, this sediments are full of fossils, dinosaurs and shellfish and all sorts of creatures and things and plants and coal and you name it. All these fossils are actually have to be buried in masses of mud, not a fraction of a thickness of a sheet of paper per year. And you've even got jellyfish fossil. How do you get a jellyfish fossil? Lots of mud dumped on it. You think about a horse that's died out in the bush or out in the paddock, or a sheep. How long does it last? A few months, all the bones are scattered all over the place, and it's in a year or two it's gone.
Yeah.
You know, you can't get fossils formed without masses of mud. You can't get fossils formed with 0.004 millimetres of mud per year, which is what you end up with if you talk about the millions of years. So again, the millions of years make no sense.
Yeah. The other thing, I mean, when they talk about, you know, the churning of the earth, you know, it's one of their theories that we've got these plates that just keep moving over each other. If that really happened, we'd find a lot of fossils upside down. And I've never seen that.
There's plenty of evidence that the plates are moving and are, you know, they do move. And in fact, there's a creationist geophysicist, Dr. John Baumgartner. He was famous some years ago for developing the world's best supercomputer model of plate tectonics, and he showed that it can only work in a rapid fashion, and actually explains a lot about Noah's flood and how it happened, and how the water came off the land at the end of the flood, and how the mountains were built by the processes at that time. And in fact, if you look at Mount Everest, and this is, you know, secular readings, it's growing at 2 millimetres per year upwards, you know, so it's increasing in height at 2 millimetres per year.
Yep.
Again, if you start multiplying that by millions of years, you've got a serious problem. And see, those mountains are supposed to have been there for 40 or 50 million years, according to the secular view. Well, you've multiplied 40 million years by 2 millimetres, and you've got 80 kilometres of material. So Mount Everest should be 80 kilometres high.
Yes.
And it is high, but not that high.
Yeah, and there's not enough evidence of erosion either. I mean, surely you've got evidence, but certainly not enough.
Well, the thing is that the 2 millimetres per year is net of erosion, right? So that's the amount it's actually growing by.
Yep.
You know, it's already subtracted the erosion.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So that's the current rate. So they have to argue, it must have been much slower in the past. Well, you know.
Yeah. Whereas
that's the argument.
Whereas, you know, a big flood makes so much sense.
Yeah, well, there's sea creatures on the top of Mount Everest. You know, there's shellfish and different things on the top of Mount Everest. So everybody agrees that Mount Everest was once under the sea. It's just a question of how and what's the time scale. And the time scale doesn't fit with the 50 million years idea.
Yeah. And you probably find similar shellfish, you know, not that long ago alive in other places.
Oh, many of them are still alive now.
Yeah.
So there's actually been no biological evolution either. So you get lots of things like bivalves. I mean, you might have been to the beach and got pippies. You know, you can eat them or you can use them for bait.
Yep.
For fishing. You put your toes in the sand and those pippies, they've been around for supposedly 400 or 500 million years, unchanged.
Yeah, right. So that's because they're at the top of the mountain, and you'd imagine that would be the one place on Earth, if it really did work that way, that would have the most evolved or devolved, I guess, is that a word? The oldest, and everything would have evolved from there. But, you know, from what I've heard, you get the same sort of you know, shellfish and other skeletons everywhere at all different heights.
Well, there's things have become extinct, but there are a lot of things that are still around. They're just the same, like jellyfish and starfish and brachiopods and the bivalves, which is like the pippies, and these things they're there at the bottom of the fossil-bearing sediment strata, and they're still around today.
Yep.
There's things that are no longer here today. The things that have become extinct for sure, but there's the things that we still haven't changed much. So where's the evolution?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's biology. It doesn't make any sense either.
Wow. Well, Dr. Don, we've had a bit of a shorter afternoon with you today, but very interesting nonetheless when it comes to, looking at times and, those millions and billions of years. And so often you say stuff, you tell us stuff that's just so simple. And you just go, yeah, that doesn't make sense. How could it possibly be millions and billions of years? And thank you for those little tidbits every time. There's something there that I can use again on somebody that tries to argue with me, who's listened to too much telly. That unfortunately they don't tell all the truth. Instead, we hear it from a scientist, somebody who has studied and understands so many of those scientific principles, and we can see that the world really is young, about 6,000 years. Is that correct?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Don. We really appreciate having you and look forward to having you again next time.
Okay, Meg. Good to talk to you.
Thank you. Coming up next, we've got Crowder with Grave Robber. You're on 94.9. It is 10 minutes to 5.